humanity didn't slam the door. There was no echoing impact. No dramatic gesture meant to carve a memory into the walls of the chamber of accord. No raised voices. No final warning thrown like a blade into the silence. They simply stood. Chairs that had been calibrated for dozens of species, gravity-adjusted, temperature-tuned, responsive to biology and ego alike, shifted as the human delegation rose in unison. The motion was small. Controlled. Almost unremarkable. And yet it drew every eye in the chamber. Because it broke rhythm. For centuries, no delegation had ever interrupted proceedings like that. Not during a session. Not during deliberation. Not when the council was speaking. The chamber noticed. It always did. Light refracted differently across the towering crystalline arcs above, subtle hues of blue and violet sharpening into something colder. The air, if it could be called that, tightened, molecular density adjusting to the emotional output of the gathered intelligences. A system designed to maintain balance now struggled to interpret what it was sensing. This wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was withdrawal. Ambassador Elias Varn was the last to rise. His chair retracted silently behind him, folding into the floor as if it had never been there. For a brief moment, he remained still, hands relaxed at his sides, gaze fixed not on the council tiers above, but somewhere slightly below them. A deliberate angle. Not submissive. Measured. Around him, alien delegates shifted in their own ways, mass redistributing, energy fields tightening, sensory arrays focusing. Some leaned forward in curiosity. Others in irritation. A few did not move at all, their stillness more oppressive than motion. Proceedings are not concluded, a voice resonated across layered frequencies, the translation arriving in Elias's mind a fraction of a second after the sound itself. He didn't respond. Not immediately. Because responding would acknowledge that the statement still applied. Instead, he took a single step forward. The sound, soft, human, almost insignificant, carried impossibly far in the chamber's perfect acoustics. It echoed not as noise, but as event. A marker in time. A point of divergence. Behind him, the rest of the human delegation followed. No formation. No ceremony. Just movement. Coordinated not by command, but by understanding. You are expected to remain, another voice pressed, sharper now. Deliberation requires. Elias stopped. Not turning fully. Not offering the council the satisfaction of direct engagement. Just enough of a pause to acknowledge the moment. Then, without raising his voice, he spoke. Then deliberate, he said. Simple. Calm. Final. And then he continued walking. The doors of the chamber did not open automatically. For a fraction of a second, they hesitated, as if the system itself was unsure whether to permit departure during active council authority. Protocols layered over protocols, each one attempting to reconcile rule with anomaly. Then, slowly, they parted. A line of darkness beyond the threshold. Not empty space, but unobserved space. The kind that felt heavier than the chamber behind it. Elias crossed it without looking back. One by one, the rest of humanity followed. No last glance. No hesitation. No need. The doors closed with a sound so soft it barely existed. And in the silence that followed, something shifted. Not in the chamber. Not in the delegates. But somewhere deeper, across networks, across systems, across the invisible structures that held the galaxy together. A tremor without motion. A reaction without cause. As if reality itself had registered the act, and was still deciding what it meant. Because wars begin with words. Empires rise on declarations. But this? This was neither. This was a species choosing, in absolute silence. To stop participating. And somehow, that was far more dangerous than anything the galaxy had prepared for. The Chamber of Accord did not exist in a single place. It existed between places. Suspended at the gravitational convergence of a dozen star systems, the structure stretched like a luminous ring carved from living metal, its surface rippling with slow, deliberate motion, as if it were thinking. From a distance, it looked serene. Balanced. Perfect. Up close, it felt like judgment. Entire fleets could dock within its inner circumference, yet no ships were visible now. By design. Power here did not need to be displayed. It was assumed. Understood. Absolute. Inside, the central hall expanded into a vast circular expanse where scale lost meaning. Gravity shifted subtly depending on where you stood, adjusting for species that walked, floated, phased, or simply existed as fields of energy. Light poured from no single source, illuminating the chamber in a soft, omnipresent glow that revealed everything, and hid nothing. At the center of that impossible space stood one human. Ambassador Elias Varn. His boots rested on a platform of polished black alloy that reflected not just his figure, but a fractured version of everything above him. Endless tiers of delegates spiraled outward and upward, each layer occupied by civilizations that had survived long enough to believe survival was their right. Some delegates had form, towering, multi-limbed structures encased in armor or exoskeletons. Others shimmered, their bodies composed of shifting energy patterns that hummed faintly at the edge of perception. A few were represented only by distortions in the air, gravity wells where presence replaced visibility. All of them were watching him. Not as an equal. As a variable. Above Elias, a holographic construct unfolded slowly, like a galaxy blooming in reverse. Star systems ignited into view, connected by glowing threads of commerce, communication, and control. It was not just a map. It was a blueprint of dominance. And there, near the outer edge of a dense network of territories, was Earth. Small. Blue. Encircled by faint lines that didn't connect outward, but inward. Containment pathways. Elias studied it in silence, his expression unreadable, but his thoughts precise. He noted the angles. The distances. The way human space had been subtly repositioned within the map, not geographically, but strategically. Not isolated. Managed. The Council had already decided where humanity belonged. They were simply waiting for humanity to agree. Around the chamber, low-frequency communication pulses passed between delegates, silent conversations unfolding at speeds no human could match. Data exchanged. Predictions calculated. Outcomes refined. Elias felt the pressure of it, not physically, but cognitively. Like standing in the center of a storm made entirely of thought. Every movement he made was being analyzed. Every breath measured. Every possible response already simulated and categorized. He had read the reports. Studied the histories. Understood the pattern. Young civilizations were not destroyed. They were guided. Shaped. Restricted. Folded into systems they did not control until they forgot what control had ever felt like. His mission had been simple in wording. Negotiate autonomy. In reality, it meant something else entirely. Prove that humanity could not be quietly absorbed. The chamber adjusted again, light dimming slightly, sound narrowing. A signal. Subtle, but unmistakable. The Council was preparing to speak. Above him, Earth's projection pulsed once, its soft blue glow steady against the overwhelming presence of empires that spanned entire sectors. It looked fragile. It looked small. It looked outmatched. Elias exhaled slowly, the breath measured, controlled. Because he knew something the map did not show. Something the Council had not accounted for. Humanity had not come here to expand. It had come here to decide whether this system was worth remaining part of at all. And as the chamber settled into expectant silence, that decision was already beginning to take shape. The terms are reasonable. The voice did not echo. It settled. Layered across frequencies both audible and implied, it pressed into the chamber like gravity shifting by a fraction, subtle, but impossible to ignore. When the council spoke in unison, it didn't sound like agreement. It sounded like inevitability. Ambassador Elias Varn didn't move. Above him, the holographic construct sharpened. The soft glow of interstellar routes hardened into defined corridors. Borders thickened. Pathways narrowed. The galaxy, once presented as a network of opportunity, was now being redrawn as something far more controlled. Structured. Directed. Closed. Compliance ensures stability, the voice continued, each word delivered with surgical calm. Not a threat. Not a warning. A conclusion. Elias's eyes tracked the changes, not with urgency, but with precision. He watched as human space shifted again, its position subtly adjusted relative to surrounding territories. Trade routes rerouted. Access points reduced. Military vectors constrained. Not cut off. Managed. Around the chamber, the delegates leaned in, some physically, others through tightening energy fields or fluctuations in the very space they occupied. The air thickened with expectation. This was the moment they had engineered from the beginning. Acceptance. You are a young species, another voice layered in, colder, more direct. Your expansion is inefficient. Your autonomy, premature. The words slid into place like pieces of a machine already in motion. Above Elias, new data populated the display. Not projections. Decisions. Trade access, conditional. Territorial expansion, restricted. Defense authorization, council oversight required. Each line appeared with quiet finality, no flourish, no emphasis. Just facts being written into existence. Elias felt it then. Not fear. Pressure. The kind that builds not from danger, but from inevitability closing in from all sides. A psychological weight designed to make resistance feel irrational. Futile. Around him, the chamber adjusted again. Lighting narrowed, focusing subtly on his position at the center. Every path outward seemed longer now. Every shadow deeper. Even the distance to the exit felt extended. A design choice. Everything here was designed to guide outcomes. You will retain cultural independence, the first voice added, almost as an afterthought. Your species will be preserved. Preserved. Elias's jaw tightened, just enough to feel it. Preservation without freedom. Existence without choice. A future where humanity would survive, but never decide. Silence stretched. Not empty. Waiting. The council did not need to demand his answer. They had already calculated it. Across their vast networks, probabilities aligned. Historical patterns confirmed. No emerging civilization had ever refused integration once it reached this stage. The cost was too high. The alternatives too uncertain. Elias knew they believed that. That was the pressure. That was the trap. Above him, Earth's projection pulsed again, its blue light steady, fragile against the overwhelming structure surrounding it. For a moment, it looked small enough to disappear. But he didn't see weakness. He saw distance. Distance from everything being imposed here. You misunderstand us, Elias said. The words were quiet. Almost gentle. And for a fraction of a second, the chamber hesitated, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. No fear. No urgency. Just certainty. Then the reaction came. A ripple of sound, low at first, then rising. Not laughter exactly, but something close. Amusement sharpened by disbelief. Delegates shifted, recalculating, dismissing. "You misunderstand your position," a voice replied, sharper now. "There is no alternative." The chamber agreed. Elias felt it in the way attention pressed inward again, tighter this time. Expectant. Final. This was the last moment before conclusion. The last moment before humanity would either accept its place or break something far larger than itself. Elias exhaled slowly. Not in surrender. In preparation. Because somewhere beyond the chamber, beyond the reach of its control, its projections, its certainty, the alternative had already begun. "We understand perfectly." The words didn't rise. They didn't challenge. They settled, like something already decided long before it was spoken. For a fraction of a second, the chamber held its breath. Not literally. Not physically. But across the layered intelligences present, across minds that process time in different ways, across systems that predicted outcomes before actions were taken, something stalled. Because the response didn't fit. It didn't match any projected pattern. Above Elias Varn, the holographic projection of Earth pulsed once, awaiting continuation of the negotiation sequence. The system anticipated argument. Counteroffer. Concession. It received none. Elias stepped forward. Not aggressively. Not even assertively. Just, forward. His hand rose, not toward the council, not in gesture, but toward the projection itself. Fingers passing through the soft blue light of Earth's image, scattering it into flickering fragments for a brief moment before the system tried to reassemble it. He didn't let it. With a single, deliberate motion, he deactivated the display. Earth vanished. Not minimized. Not moved. Gone. For the first time since the session began, the center of the chamber was empty. And that emptiness felt wrong. A ripple moved through the council tiers. Not confusion, something deeper. A disruption in expectation. Systems recalibrating, trying to understand why a negotiation piece had been removed from the board entirely. "You will restore the projection," a voice commanded, sharper now. Elias didn't turn. "We came here to avoid what happens next," he said. Still calm. Still measured. But now there was something else beneath it. Finality. The chamber reacted, not with sound, but with pressure. Light dimmed fractionally. The ambient hum deepened. Every intelligence present leaned in, attention tightening like a closing fist. "What happens next?" another delegate demanded, irritation bleeding through the translation. Elias paused. Just long enough for the silence to stretch. Just long enough for the question to matter. Then he stepped back. The motion was small. But it broke the structure of the moment. Not forward into negotiation. Not upward into defiance. Back. Away. Turning. The chamber did not process it immediately. Because no model accounted for this. Delegations argued. They resisted. They compromised. They escalated. They did not leave. "You have not been dismissed," a voice snapped, authority hardening. Elias didn't respond. He had already turned fully now, his back to the council, a gesture so unprecedented that several monitoring systems flagged it as potential hostility before failing to categorize it correctly. Behind him, the rest of the human delegation mirrored the motion. Perfectly. Silently. No command given. None needed. The synchronized shift sent a subtle distortion through the chamber's environmental systems, as if even the architecture struggled to reconcile coordinated human intent outside expected parameters. "State your intention," another voice demanded, louder now. Less controlled. Still, no answer. Elias began walking. Each step measured. Unhurried. But unstoppable. The distance to the chamber doors suddenly felt longer than it had before, not physically, but perceptually. As if the council itself was resisting the idea of this outcome, stretching the moment, trying to find a way to reassert control before it slipped completely out of their grasp. "You will remain," the first voice repeated. For the first time, it sounded uncertain. Elias stopped. Not turning fully. Just enough. "Then deliberate," he said quietly. 3 words. No emphasis. No threat. And yet, they landed heavier than any declaration made that day. Because they weren't part of the negotiation. They were outside it. He continued walking. And as he did, something shifted. Not in the chamber. But far beyond it. Across networks that had quietly relied on human integration. Across systems that assumed participation was permanent. Across a galaxy that had never considered the possibility that a species would not fight for its place. But simply decide the system itself wasn't worth staying in. The doors ahead began to open, slowly, reluctantly. And in that widening gap of darkness beyond the chamber, the council realized something too late. This wasn't defiance. This wasn't retreat. This was the moment humanity stopped asking to belong. And started deciding what happened next. The silence that followed did not feel like peace. It felt like something essential had been removed, and the galaxy hadn't realized how much it relied on it until the absence began to spread. Inside the chamber of accord, no one spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because every possible statement now required a certainty that no longer existed. The great empires, once so composed, so absolute in their authority, now sat surrounded by flickering projections and incomplete data, watching a system they believed they controlled, slowly lose cohesion. Above them, the galactic map struggled to stabilize. Trade lanes blinked in and out of existence. Communication lines stretched thin, snapping into delays that grew longer with every passing moment. Entire sectors dimmed, not destroyed, not invaded, just disconnected. As if someone had quietly unplugged pieces of reality from the network that gave them meaning. "They will return," one voice said, forcing confidence into its tone. No one agreed. No one argued. Because belief, here, was no longer enough. Far beyond the chamber, across the vast reaches of space, the consequences deepened. Fleets accustomed to perfect synchronization now drifted out of alignment, their formation algorithms struggling to reconcile conflicting positional data. Navigation systems recalculated endlessly, unable to agree on fixed coordinates. Even time, once standardized across council systems, began to fracture into localized inconsistencies. Not chaos. Not yet. But something worse. Instability. Back within the chamber, the place where humanity had stood now felt wrong. Not empty. Not abandoned. Vacant in a way that suggested it had been part of something larger, and that larger thing had moved on. Ambassador Elias Varn was gone. And with him, something the council could not quantify had left as well. A Veil observer finally spoke, its voice quieter than before, stripped of the layered certainty it once carried. "We miscalculated." The words echoed farther than any command issued that day. Because they weren't tactical. They were foundational. The realization spread, not through systems, but through minds. Across species that had once believed themselves beyond surprise, beyond error. Each one arriving at the same conclusion from different paths of logic. Humanity had not lost the negotiation. They had invalidated it. Because the system that gave the council power, the networks, the stability, the silent infrastructure that made a galaxy function as a unified entity, had never been as independent as they believed. It had been shared. And now it was not. Outside, the stars remained where they had always been. Cold. Distant. Unchanged. But the way they connected, the invisible lattice that turned distance into accessibility, isolation into civilization, that had begun to fracture. Not violently. Quietly. Just like humanity had left. A final update flickered across the chamber's central display, an automated attempt to reclassify Earth's status within the Council framework. The system processed. Paused. Then returned a result no one had ever seen before. Status, non-participant. No threat level. No alliance marker. No containment protocol. Just, absence. The chamber dimmed slightly as systems redirected power toward failing networks, as if trying to compensate for something that could not be replaced. And in that dimming light, surrounded by uncertainty they could neither control nor predict. The greatest powers in the galaxy finally understood. Humanity had never needed to fight for its place. It had only needed to leave. And in doing so, it hadn't just walked away from the galaxy. It had taken the certainty of that galaxy with it.